whether I believe Priscilla has used the Presley name for fame and fortune. I was told that my earlier response had perhaps skirted the issue.
There's a lie that's been living in plain sight for decades. A carefully crafted illusion that's made one woman millions while rewriting the truth about one of the most iconic men in history. And the people who actually knew Elvis Presley, who shared his blood, his home, his real life, have watched in silence as that lie grew bigger and bolder with every passing year. Until now, I'm talking about Priscilla, and I'm talking about what she's been hiding behind that perfectly maintained public image, behind those carefully worded interviews, behind that billion-dollar empire built on a name that was never truly hers to use. Here's what you need to understand right from the start. When Elvis died, Priscilla wasn't given Graceland as some kind of reward or inheritance. She wasn't handed the keys to the kingdom because she was the grieving widow. She was divorced from Elvis, had been for 4 years. The marriage was over. But Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, was only 9 years old, a child who just lost her father and inherited everything he'd built. So Priscilla was entrusted. That's the word. Entrusted. She was given control of Graceland and the estate not for herself, but as a trustee, a guardian, a protector of her daughter's inheritance. The responsibility wasn't about her. It was about Lisa Marie. And by extension, it was about preserving what Elvis had created, honoring what he stood for, protecting the integrity of a legacy that belonged to the world but was rooted in family. That trust came with a moral obligation. You don't just get to manage someone's legacy like it's a stock portfolio. You don't get to treat a man's memory, his name, his life's work as raw material for your own advancement. But that's exactly what happened. At first, it was subtle. Business decisions that made sense on paper. Graceland needed to generate income or it would collapse under its own weight with taxes and maintenance. Fine, understandable. Open it to the public, let the fans pay their respects, keep the lights on. That part makes sense. But somewhere along the way, protection turned into profit. Preservation turned into production. And the woman who was supposed to be guarding the Presley legacy started using it as a launching pad for her own brand. We're not talking about a few licensing deals here and there. We're talking about a systematic transformation of Elvis Presley from a man, from an artist, from a son and father and brother into a commodity, a logo, a business opportunity. And Priscilla wasn't just managing that transformation, she was engineering it, starring in it, profiting from every single angle. Book deals where she's the author and the authority. Movie projects where she's the consultant and the beneficiary. Licensing agreements for everything from slot machines to luxury handbags. Celebrity partnerships that elevate her status in Hollywood circles that have nothing to do with Elvis's world, Elvis's values, or Elvis's family. And here's where it gets really telling. Every single venture, every business move, every public appearance, it all comes with one constant: Priscilla Presley. Not Priscilla Beaulieu, her maiden name. Not Priscilla Wagner, her father's name. Priscilla Presley. Even though the marriage ended in 1973. Even though she had no legal or biological claim to that name beyond a marriage certificate that was nullified by divorce papers. She kept the name because the name is the business. The Presley name opens doors, signs checks, commands respect and attention that Priscilla Beaulieu never would have gotten on her own. And she knew it. She's always known it. Now you might be thinking, well, she was married to him. She was the mother of his child. Doesn't she have some right to use the name? Let me answer that with a question Elvis himself used to think about. What's the difference between someone who loves you for who you are and someone who loves what you can do for them? Elvis lived that question every single day of his famous life. He was surrounded by people who wanted something. Access, money, reflected glory, and he learned to be careful. He learned to watch. He learned to test people. The family saw it happen in real time. We watched Priscilla arrive at Graceland, young and ambitious, and we watched how she looked at the Presley family from day one, like we were beneath her. Provincial, unsophisticated, not quite good enough for the world she wanted to belong to. She wanted Hollywood. She wanted elegance. She wanted a life that looked nothing like the one Elvis came from. But she had no problem whatsoever using the Presley name every single time it served her purposes. Every time there was a business deal to be made, a red carpet to walk, a talk show to appear on, suddenly she was very proud to be a Presley. But a real relationship with the actual Presley family, with Elvis's blood relatives who loved him before the world knew his name, that was never a priority. That was never even a consideration, except for Patsy, who was close to her age and useful for appearances. And here's what makes this whole thing so infuriating, so deeply wrong. Elvis told us things. He confided in his blood family because we were the ones he trusted completely. We were there before Graceland, before the gold records, before any of it mattered to anyone else. He knew our love wasn't conditional, wasn't transactional. He told us what scared him, what he hoped for, what he wanted his legacy to be. And I can tell you right now, it wasn't this. It wasn't turning his home into a tourist attraction. It wasn't slot machines with his face on them. It wasn't his ex-wife building a second career on his memory while keeping his actual family at arm's length. Elvis wanted his legacy to be about the music, the generosity, the faith, the love he had for people. He wanted to be remembered as someone who lifted others up, who gave more than he took, who stayed true to where he came from no matter how high he rose. What Priscilla has built is something else entirely. And the most tragic part, most of the world believes her version of events because she's been the loudest voice in the room for 50 years. But here's what she didn't count on. The people who actually lived with Elvis, who were there for the private moments, the real conversations, the unguarded truth, were still here. And we're done staying quiet while she rewrites history one profitable deal at a time. Let's talk about what actually happened to Graceland. Because this is where the protection story falls apart and the business strategy becomes crystal clear. When Priscilla took control of Elvis's estate, she had a choice. She could have preserved Graceland as what it was, a family home, a private sanctuary, the place where Elvis felt safe. She could have found ways to generate income that honored his memory without turning his life into a spectacle. But that's not what happened. What happened was a calculated transformation. Graceland went from being Elvis's home to being Elvis' world. Tour through his private spaces, strangers walking through his living room, his bedroom, gawking at his clothes, his cars, his personal belongings, everything on display, everything for sale. And every ticket sold, every souvenir purchased, every dollar spent, it all flows through the machine that Priscilla built. Now she'll tell you this was necessary, that the estate was in debt. That opening Graceland to the public saved it from bankruptcy. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, even noble. But let's be honest about what this really was. It was the blueprint for turning a man's legacy into a revenue stream. And once that door opened, there was no closing it. The licensing deals came next. And this is where you really see the strategy at work. Because it's not just about Graceland anymore. It's about putting Elvis's name, his image, his likeness on anything and everything that someone will pay for. Slot machines in Las Vegas casinos, fashion collaborations, luxury brand partnerships, product endorsements for things Elvis never used, never believed in, never would have wanted his name attached to. And here's the kicker. Every single one of these deals requires approval. Someone has to sign off and say, yes, this is appropriate, this honors Elvis, this is what he would have wanted. That someone for decades was Priscilla. She was the gatekeeper, the decision maker, the one who decided which opportunities were worth pursuing and which crossed the line. Except apparently nothing crossed the line. If the check was big enough, the deal went through. If the brand was prestigious enough, Elvis's name went on it. There was no protective instinct, no moment where she said, you know what, this cheapens his memory, this isn't who he was, we're not doing this. Because the goal was never protection. The goal was profit, and business was very, very good. But it's not just about the products and the licensing. It's about how Priscilla positioned herself at the center of the entire operation. She's not just managing the estate. She's building her own celebrity brand in parallel. Red carpet appearances at events that have nothing to do with Elvis. Friendships with A-list celebrities who give her access to social circles she could never have entered as Priscilla Beaulieu from Brooklyn. Television shows, acting roles, business ventures completely separate from Elvis's legacy, but always introduced as Priscilla Presley. The name is the currency. It's what makes her relevant. It's what keeps her in rooms she otherwise wouldn't be invited to. And she's wielded that name like a weapon and a shield for 50 years, using it whenever it benefits her and distancing herself from the actual Presley family whenever we become inconvenient. Then there are the books. Oh, the books. Priscilla's written her version of the Elvis story multiple times now, and every version comes with the same subtext. She's the insider, the authority, the one who really knew him. And every book sold, every interview given, every documentary appearance, it all reinforces the same narrative. Her narrative. The one where she's the tragic ex-wife, the devoted mother, the savvy businesswoman who saved Elvis's legacy from ruin. Never mind that Lisa Marie grew up and started asking very difficult questions about how the estate was being managed. Never mind that the relationship between mother and daughter became strained, complicated, painful, especially when it came to business decisions and control of the estate. Those tensions don't make it into Priscilla's carefully curated public story. Those conflicts stay private. Because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, even Elvis's own daughter had concerns about what was happening to her father's legacy. And then came the ultimate betrayal of the family trust. The movie deals, the biopics, the dramatizations, every single one requiring Priscilla's blessing, her consultation, often her direct involvement, and every single one shaping how the world sees Elvis, what they believe about his life, his character, his relationships. She's not just managing the estate anymore, she's controlling the narrative. She's deciding which version of Elvis gets told, which parts of his story get emphasized, which truths get buried. And conveniently, the version that gets told most often is the one where Priscilla is central to everything, where she's his great love, his muse, his partner, where their relationship is romanticized and idealized, even though the marriage lasted 6 years and ended because neither of them was happy. The divorce happened for a reason, multiple reasons. But in the public story Priscilla sells, those reasons get softened, explained away, reframed as tragedy instead of truth. Here's what really exposes the whole game, though. When Elvis died in 1977, Priscilla was his ex-wife, legally, officially, completely divorced. In most situations, that would mean you move on, you rebuild your life, you find your own identity separate from your former spouse. But Priscilla did the exact opposite. She doubled down on being a Presley. She made it her entire identity, her career, her brand. Why? Because Priscilla Beaulieu has no market value. Priscilla Wagner has no celebrity currency. But Priscilla Presley? That name opens every door in Hollywood. That name gets book deals and movie consultations and licensing agreements worth millions. That name is the foundation of an empire that's generated more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. And none of it, not one single dollar, would exist without Elvis, without his talent, his charisma, his extraordinary life, the legacy he built through his own blood, sweat, and soul. Priscilla didn't create any of that. She just happened to be married to the man who did, for 6 years, half a century ago. But she's been dining out on those 6 years ever since, building wealth, status, and influence on a foundation she didn't lay, using a name she has no biological claim to, exploiting a legacy that was supposed to be protected, not monetized into oblivion. That's not guardianship. That's not honoring someone's memory. That's business. Cold, calculated, ruthlessly effective business. And the person at the center of it all has gotten very, very rich, while the family that actually shares Elvis's blood has watched from the outside, excluded, dismissed, and silenced. Until now. Here's where the real damage becomes impossible to ignore. Because it's one thing to profit from someone's name. It's another thing entirely to rewrite who they were in order to make that profit more lucrative, more dramatic, more sellable to the masses. The Elvis that Priscilla has sold to the world through her books, her interviews, her consultant roles on films and documentaries, that's not the Elvis we knew. That's not the man who lived at Graceland with his family. That's a character, a construction, a version of Elvis Presley that serves a narrative Priscilla needed in order to maintain control of the story. In her version, Elvis is complicated, troubled, controlling at times, dependent on her, lost without her guidance. A man who needed saving, managing, understanding that only she could provide. She paints herself as the woman who civilized him, who brought sophistication into his world, who understood him in ways his simple Southern family never could. It's a clever story. It positions her as essential. It makes her the heroine of the Elvis Presley saga, the intelligent woman trying to help a genius who couldn't help himself. And it's been incredibly effective. Millions of people believe this version because it's been repeated so many times in so many formats by the one person the media always goes to when they want the real story about Elvis. But here's what that story conveniently leaves out. Elvis Presley was one of the most emotionally intelligent, perceptive people you could ever meet. He read people instantly. He understood human nature in ways that most people never develop, and he was careful, incredibly careful about who he trusted with his real thoughts, his real fears, his real self. The family knew this about him because we saw it every single day. Elvis would be one way with the hangers-on, the entourage, the people who were around for the ride. He'd be different with business associates, different with fans, different with journalists. He showed people what he wanted them to see, what served the moment, what protected the private man underneath the public persona. And sometimes he'd deliberately tell people things just to see how they'd react, just to test whether they'd keep a confidence or run their mouth, just to understand who was genuinely loyal and who was playing a role. I watched him do this. We all did. It wasn't manipulation, it was survival. When you're Elvis Presley and everyone wants something from you, you learn to be strategic about what you reveal and to whom. So when Priscilla claims she knew Elvis better than anyone, when she positions herself as the ultimate authority on what he thought, what he felt, what he wanted, I have to ask the question Elvis would have asked. Are you sure you got the real story? Or did you get the version he wanted you to believe? Because the Elvis who confided in his blood family, who sat with us late at night when the crowds were gone and the performance was over, he said things that directly contradict the portrait Priscilla has painted. He talked about what mattered to him: faith, family, loyalty, staying connected to where he came from, not becoming one of those people who forgets their roots the moment they get successful. He worried about people using him, about relationships that felt transactional, about whether anyone loved him for who he was underneath the fame, or whether it was all just about what he represented, what he could provide, what doors he could open. Those weren't abstract fears. Those were real, daily concerns for a man who'd been burned enough times to know the difference between genuine connection and opportunism. And the sad irony is that some of the people he was most wary of, some of the relationships that troubled him most, those are the same people now claiming to be the definitive voice on his legacy. Priscilla's narrative also does something particularly damaging. It diminishes Elvis as an artist and as a man. By constantly portraying him as troubled, as dependent, as someone who needed managing, she erodes the public's understanding of his actual genius, his work ethic, his discipline, his incredible emotional depth and intelligence. Elvis wasn't just a good-looking guy who could sing. He was a revolutionary artist who changed the entire landscape of American music and culture. He worked harder than almost anyone in the industry. He was generous to a fault. He was deeply spiritual. He thought constantly about legacy, about meaning, about using his platform to bring people together rather than divide them. But that version of Elvis doesn't make for dramatic television. That version doesn't position Priscilla as the long-suffering woman trying to save a tragic figure. So the edges get sanded off. The complexity gets reduced. The man becomes a myth and not always a flattering one. And here's what really reveals the disconnect between Priscilla and the Presley family. From the moment she arrived at Graceland, there was a distance, an attitude. She looked at us, Elvis's blood relatives, the people who raised him and loved him before he was famous, and she saw us as provincial, unsophisticated, embarrassing even. She wanted Hollywood. She wanted elegance and prestige and a social circle that looked nothing like Memphis, Tennessee. She wanted to be part of a world that the Presley family didn't fit into. And she made that very clear through her actions, her choices, the way she kept us at arm's length while simultaneously using our family name to open every door she encountered. If she truly considered herself a Presley, if she genuinely felt connected to this family, where's the relationship? Where's the bond? Why has there been decades of distance, of exclusion, of treating Elvis's blood relatives like we're irrelevant to his story, except when our existence serves her narrative? The answer is obvious. She wanted the name without the family, the brand without the roots, the prestige without the responsibility of actually being connected to the people who share Elvis's blood, who knew him before the world did, who loved him unconditionally in ways that had nothing to do with fame or fortune. Priscilla built her entire post-divorce life on being Elvis Presley's ex-wife. She created a celebrity identity, a business empire, a public persona that's completely dependent on that connection. But she's never had to account for the contradictions, never had to explain why the family she claims to be part of doesn't recognize the Elvis she describes. Never had to reconcile the saint she sells in books with the flawed, controlled man she sometimes portrays in interviews when it serves a different narrative purpose. She gets to have it both ways. Elvis the icon when she needs credibility, Elvis the troubled soul when she needs sympathy, Elvis the great love when she needs romance, Elvis the complicated genius when she needs to explain why their marriage failed. But the Elvis we knew was consistent. He was exactly who he presented himself to be with his family. Faithful, loyal, generous, deeply connected to his roots, and fiercely protective of the people who loved him for reasons that had nothing to do with what he could do for them. That's the man whose legacy deserves protection, not the character Priscilla invented for profit. Time is running out. That's the reality we're facing as a family, And it's the reason I'm speaking now, clearly and directly, even when it would be easier to stay silent. Every year that passes, another person who actually lived with Elvis, who knew him in the unguarded moments, who heard what he really thought and felt, that person passes away. And with each loss, a piece of the first-hand truth goes with them. The lived experience, the real conversations, the authentic memories that can't be found in any book or interview because they were never meant for public consumption. They were just life, family life. The truth that exists in the quiet moments when the world isn't watching. Right now, there are still a few of us left. Still a handful of people who can say, I was there, I lived it, I heard it directly from Elvis, not secondhand, not filtered through someone else's agenda or interpretation. Direct, first-hand knowledge of who he was when he didn't have to be Elvis Presley, the icon, when he could just be Elvis, a son, a brother, a cousin, a man trying to navigate an impossible level of fame while staying true to the person he was before any of it happened. But we won't be here forever. None of us will. And when the last family member who lived alongside Elvis at Graceland is gone, what happens then? Who gets to tell his story? Who becomes the official voice of the Elvis Presley legacy? The answer, unless something changes, is Priscilla, the ex-wife who spent 50 years crafting a narrative that serves her interests. The woman who's built an empire on his name while keeping his actual family on the outside. The person who profits every single time Elvis's story gets told, which means she has a vested financial interest in controlling what that story says and how it gets presented to the world. That's not preservation, that's ownership. And the tragedy is that most people don't even realize the difference. They think Priscilla is protecting Elvis's legacy because that's how she's positioned herself. The devoted guardian, the keeper of the flame, the one person who truly understands what Elvis would have wanted. But she wasn't there at the beginning. She wasn't part of the foundation. She entered Elvis's life when he was already famous, already formed, already the person his family had raised him to be. She was there for a chapter. An important chapter, yes. The mother of his child, absolutely. But a chapter nonetheless. And when that chapter ended with divorce papers in 1973, the story should have moved forward without her at the center of it. Instead, she made herself the narrator, the interpreter, the final authority. And every year that narrative gets more entrenched, more accepted as fact, harder to challenge or correct. This isn't about hatred. I want to be very clear about that. This isn't a personal vendetta or family drama for the sake of drama. This is about truth, about accuracy, about making sure that when people remember Elvis Presley, they're remembering the real man, not the sanitized, dramatized, monetized version that's been packaged and sold for decades. There's a profound difference between being born a Presley and being married to one. Blood carries something that vows simply don't. It carries history, shared experience, unconditional connection that exists before fame, before money, before any outside factor enters the equation. The family loved Elvis when he was driving a truck and singing in small venues. We loved him when he became the biggest star in the world. And we loved him after, in the difficult years, when the pressure and the loneliness and the weight of expectation became almost unbearable. That love wasn't transactional. It wasn't dependent on what he could do for us. It was just love, the kind that family provides, the kind that doesn't come with contracts or conditions or calculations about future benefit. Marriage can offer proximity to that kind of bond. It can create partnership, companionship, shared life experience. But it doesn't automatically grant inheritance of family identity. And when the marriage ends, when divorce legally and officially severs that partnership, the claim to family identity should end too. Priscilla chose to keep the Presley name. That was a business decision, a branding decision. And she's never had to answer for it because the world assumes that being Elvis's ex-wife gives her permanent rights to his legacy. But blood relatives who share his DNA, who carry forward the actual genetic and historical legacy of the Presley family, we're treated like we're intruders in our own family story. That imbalance needs to be corrected, and it needs to happen while the people who can correct it with authority, with first-hand knowledge, with lived truth, are still here to do so. Elvis built his legacy on certain values: faith in God, loyalty to family, generosity toward others, humility about his gifts. He never forgot where he came from. He never treated his family like they were less important than the celebrities and executives and powerful people who wanted access to him. He kept us close. He lived with us at Graceland because we were his safe place. The one space where he could breathe without performing, without second-guessing every word and gesture, without wondering who was genuine and who was just playing a role. That safe place, that sanctuary, it's our responsibility now to protect. Not the building, not the tourist attraction, the memory, the truth, the man himself. Elvis deserves to be remembered accurately, not as a tragic figure who needed saving, not as a cash cow for business ventures that have nothing to do with his values or his art, not as a brand to be managed and monetized into perpetuity. He deserves to be remembered as he was, talented beyond measure, generous beyond reason, faithful to his roots, complicated, yes, human, absolutely, but fundamentally good, fundamentally decent, fundamentally connected to the family and the faith that shaped him long before the world knew his name. That's the legacy worth protecting. That's the truth worth fighting for. And that's why I'm speaking now, while I still can, while the first-hand knowledge still exists, before it's too late to correct the record. Because once we're gone, Priscilla's version becomes the only version. And that cannot be allowed to happen. Elvis deserves better. His daughter deserved better. And the family that loved him first and longest deserves to have our voices heard before time silences us forever. This is our last stand for truth, and we're taking it. If you believe family truth matters more than manufactured narratives, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with anyone who cares about Elvis's real legacy. Leave a comment telling me what you think about who owns the right to someone's story after they're gone. And stay tuned, because there's more to reveal. Specific deals, specific decisions, specific contradictions that need to see daylight. This is just the beginning.